Hey, welcome to Overtime, where we take Sunday's message further. My name is Jeremy, and I'm your host. And this is a podcast where we just want to ask the questions that we think that you would ask as it relates to Sunday's message. And as we do so, we hope that it helps you grow in your life and your faith. With that being said, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of the podcasts that are coming out. Not only that, hit the like button, because when you do so, it helps us help other people. And if you ever have a question about Sunday's content or about Overtime, you can submit those to overtime@npaustin.com, and we will be sure to get to those in future podcasts. So with that being said, here's a quick recap of Sunday, and then we're going to jump into our conversation today.
What is the purpose of sex? I have the right to do everything, you say, but not everything is beneficial. The body is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord. Sex is not just physical because you are not just physical. Do you not know that he unites himself with a prostitute, is one with her in the body? And what Paul is starting to unearth in this conversation is he's pointing to intimacy. This intimacy, it's symbolic of the type of relationship that your Heavenly Father desires with you. Flee from sexual immorality. Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit? You are not your own. You were bought at a price. The purpose of sex is intimacy and having children. And I would suggest that when we try to use it for other purposes, when we take it out of that context of that permanently committed marriage covenant, what happens is it just complicates things. The love handle that I'd like to throw out for part 4 is simply this, that sex is not just physical, it's so much better than that.
So now we can start.
Okay.
Now that Josh is ready, we can begin.
Josh.
So can we start with, and we've talked about this, but just to point out, Buck is gone on a sabbatical.
Right.
Right? And so he's really taken this time to just reflect and work on his own, health and all that comes with that, connect with Jill, connect with God, vision for the church, all these deep spiritual wonderful things. And he's like, I'm going to be gone for a big chunk of time, so why don't, while I'm gone, we plan a series where everyone else has to talk about the most awkward topics
Exactly.
ever. That'd be so cool for Jen to talk about wives submit to your husbands and get lots of people irritated. It'd be great and Jordan, you should just talk about sex.
Yep. It feels an accurate description of what has happened, of what has occurred.
Well, you did. I think you did a great job, but how awkward was that for you?
That's a good question. Because, I felt all week student ministry, I was 20 years old, probably for first message, which is ironic and it's funny in and of itself. But it's I had all the years where everybody in the room is 14 to 18, not married, very specific stage of life.
Yep.
Doesn't mean there's not different perspectives, but it was like a window. And as soon as he threw that out there on the schedule for the series, I was immediately aware of okay, so now we have 15 to 85 in the room.
All sorts of variety of
landmines everywhere, And so,
there's so many things that could go wrong.
I
will say, out of all the topics, because I have been able to see the 5 weeks, right? You had the most difficult one. I thought mine actually with the whole
I was going to say that part 2 would be competitive, but
no, I really feel because Paul does a great job, we just we don't start where Paul starts, right? So as long as we can keep bringing it back to where Paul actually starts it,
right,
then I'm it's breezy, because it's just a legit conversation. Even though I know for some people it still ruffled some feathers. I think we got a few comments on some social media stuff about just that context and stuff, but they also probably just watched a clip, not the whole thing. But in general, when you think about landmines, I had one. I had people are going to hear this word submit, and they're going to have a connotation, they're going to have some baggage with it. We just need to unpack that. You have. I mean, it's just so many things that come with that. But I really thought you did a great job.
Well, I appreciate that.
So, I also was amused. I loved watching you be uncomfortable, and I think this is so great.
Well, once I found my family in the crowd, once I now it's oh, here's this patch where my mom is sitting where I need to not look for the rest of the message, and just that kind of stuff.
Don't look at mom. Now, so let me ask you this, because before I communicated and did church stuff, I did music stuff. So my mom was always the worst person to watch in an audience.
Yeah.
Mainly because she had this face of I think what she meant in what was happening in her soul was, you can do it, you can do it, you can
Yeah.
do it, like believe in me. But it almost looked like she was in pain.
Yeah.
Because she was like believing for me so intensely that if I looked at her, it looked like I was doing a bad job, right?
Yeah.
So when you watch your mom, obviously it's probably a little different.
Yeah.
Like when you're talking about like, Jesus loves you.
She's definitely, she's emotive. Her body moves.
Okay.
She like 100%. But I mean, I don't look at her often. It's like hard to stay kind of in the moment, and then be talking to my mom. Like it just,
Okay.
that's a whole different part of you
Yeah,
that like
it
tends to
is.
come out. So I love that she's, probably my number one fan. I really appreciate it. I do
Yes.
deeply appreciate it. But once I find her in the crowd, it's usually I'm kind of looking over her head for the rest of the time, It's kind of how it goes.
The podcast is going to be about Sunday morning content.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
just
yeah.
now I have all these communicator questions. Have you ever caught anybody falling asleep?
Oh, 100%.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, especially like students that will do back over the back of the chair. So like straight up.
Oh, like they're not even trying.
Yeah, it's like they've been
Yes.
shot. Like they're just like, the head like bobbing is fun. Like if somebody's
Yeah.
like kind of like, it's like
Yeah,
at least I can
yes.
think they're like nodding along or something. But the people that are sprawled are like always the best.
I have this best friend. We've been best friends since I was like 18, and she would always sit in the front row because she was such a good supporter, and she would always fall asleep.
Yep.
Like without fail.
Yeah.
Every time she's like, "You did so good." I'm like, "You literally were asleep." Like,
Tell me your favorite part.
yeah. I have no clue what you said, but I know So anyway, okay. So you communicated about a difficult topic, and so I wanted to kind of start with, we laugh about it, we talk about it, we've made fun of you that you had to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Why though do we think this is so? I mean, we have songs about it. It's in everything Hollywood does. It's in you can't even I was watching something the other night in Times Square, and I was like, it's everywhere. It's every poster. It's every advertisement. Sex or sexuality is a part of every conversation, even when you start talking about cultural stuff. So why is it in so many ways we can talk about it without talking about it? Why is that so difficult, do you think?
Yeah, I think at least, I don't know if it's the reason, but like one of the reasons, and I felt conscious of this in like prep too, is that because of the nature that it is intimate and vulnerable, regardless of what we try to pretend or talk about or joke, I think we know that. And I think as a result, it does get talked about less, at least in terms of our personal struggles, questions, this is normal, is everybody else experiencing, and so on. Like when we were talking offline, I was using an example of like even fighting. Like we a lot of us try to hide how much we might like fight or have conflict or argue, but we're still more likely to bring that out, allude to it, joke about it. Hey, we're struggling to communicate than if we're struggling sexually or what's normal or what should be the standard or what should be the frequency. And probably a buildup of that over time creates, so many nuanced messages, expectations, communications, and culture in our world, in church, and so on. And then we have like not only information that isn't true, but that we have false expectations. We have it's difficult to be like, this is the North Star. Like this is what health looks like. This is
How do you even find one?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, for whatever reason, I think. I was struggling to think of a topic where like there would be more mixed messages or where culture, there might be a bigger divide culturally, if you will. I use lying as the example where like you don't have to be a Christian to say, hey, lying, maybe we should do a little less. Like maybe it's not the ideal. But when it's, comes to sex, what's marketed at us and then the conversation that we had in church on Sunday, like those feel like you live in two different time periods, two different worlds, two different.
I loved your old school and new school thing, but that it really is actually flipped.
Right. Yeah.
That's a great question. I'm trying to think of what else could be. About the only other thing I can think of that might be is like nutrition-y, healthy kind of category of like, hey, we don't talk about. There's a lot of shame associated on both sides, right? On like, hey, it's just a complicated topic.
Yeah.
Although it's not.
Yeah,
It's the same
sure.
thing.
Yeah.
Like when doctors say, hey, you need to get some movement in your life and in your day, and you need to eat healthy and get some fruits and vegetables. We're like, yeah, we know.
Yeah.
And then we're marketed in a totally different way, whether it's like, hey, starve yourself to look like this, or hey, everything goes. I mean, so I think like such another thing, right? Like that's required for survival. Just like sex is required for our species to survive.
Yeah.
Food is required for us to survive, but we have these warped.
Yeah.
It becomes, it's that candle illustration that you had on Sunday morning. Food to me, food and diet or just that kind of work, that there's a little bit more into that world, not just food, but it's like when we don't properly contain it, it's not used as fuel. It becomes pleasure, or it becomes an emotional pacifier. It becomes like, so that's about the only thing. And we don't really talk about that. Like, we don't talk about like, hey, Sal, we don't even talk about it in our own marriage. Every New Year's resolution is like, we're really going to get it this time, right? But that's about the only other thing I can compare. You rarely hear a sermon on it, but it is a thing.
Yeah, totally.
But it's very intimate to our physical selves, too, which I think is a big part of this whole topic.
Yeah. So I don't know. There's something there that I think then is like I used different examples, not intentionally each service, but it's like the idea that that this changes based on the phase or stage of relationship that you're in, and then that just goes like unspoken. I think in first service I talked about like we're newlyweds versus we got 5 kids under 3 versus like now we got teenagers that can walk in on us versus like now we're empty nesters, and we don't like. There's this like unspoken, we know it's changed, but if we haven't like connected on it or talked about it or, and then what does it look like for everybody else in each, is something wrong with us now? It's been a while and nobody said anything. And, we assume everybody around us is having Hollywood sex all the time. And you're like, just these weird, it's painful. How normal is that? It's, there's like all of these different like pieces that we just kind of really can get like isolated. And then there can be this, great pressure around it or so on. That is just, it's complicated. There's an identity tie to it for a lot of us, a shame and guilt factor where when we, feel like we've missed the mark in other areas, it doesn't impact us in the same way that it seems to in this area. And there's some valid good reasons. Like there is a sacredness to it, but there's also reasons that are totally manufactured that are just put upon us but we carry and are so real and so deep in our psyche, and especially based on our our stories, how we're parented, church experiences,
it has an interesting weight. Where I want to say like, hey, it's not that big of a deal, but it's also a super big deal at the exact same time. And it's interesting you said earlier, you were just like, there's not really a North Star. There's not really like here is specifically how this should look in each phase. But it is, at least in my experience with working with other couples, like it is rarely what we think it is, right? So, like we were talking earlier and we were just Googling like different stats on like what is our culture currently doing in this realm, and we're talking about like students or younger people are actually having less sex than I think we think. But I think the students don't know that either. I think they think everyone's having sex or being sexually active but me. Then just fast forward to even my phase of life. We're in the teenagers might walk in phase, which I think should on some level bother everyone to some extent. But the depth to which it really bothers my husband is hilarious. But so if we didn't, if we both assumed this was right or wrong, that and I was just guessing, oh, well, Sal just isn't interested in me, at this season, as opposed to Sal saying, look, here's the deal. I am freaked out by the idea of the boys walking in. That's but we had to have that conversation, or I could have easily written another story. So I do think like at every phase, questioning like bringing into the light what is happening, and what is the gap between what is happening and what each of us would like to happen, and that we might not both land on the other side of the bridge in the same place, right? But but in that conversation, we're building a bridge. We're saying, hey, here's where we are. Let's just be real. We're not as active as I'd like to be. We've been married for 10 years, or we're super active and I'm exhausted, and I'm feeling used as opposed to, and I'm kind of having to go through the motions, or, and then we both say, here's where we'd like to be. And then, but it is, I love that your challenge at the end for married couples was like, just talk about it. Start there. And then you were also clear to be like, hey, those of you that are sarcastic, I felt like you were looking at me when you were like, those of you that are sarcastic and will make a joke about everything, you need to be serious.
I think I was trying to talk more to dudes in that moment.
Oh, sorry.
You're not the only sarcastic person in my life, but I mean, yeah.
But I do think that goes back to that. We don't really know what health looks like.
Yeah, 100%. No, and there is like, if you haven't, or if you don't talk about it for any number of reasons, I think there's a lot, but that like first deposit of it, is like, breaks a huge barrier.
Yeah.
You know, I wouldn't evaluate all future conversations based on that first one. That first one probably is the most awkward or painful or, you know, whatever, like keep the conversation going. But just like kind of, you know, entering that world a little bit that does feel like so vulnerable to venture into, I think does start to remove a lot of that weight and hopefully put it in a more like proper context, like you were saying. I mean, it's like so many things. We either we hold it higher than it's supposed to be, or we devalue it more than, you know, it's hard to keep it in that kind of proper space of important, not the end all be all. How does that work? Like, you know. So.
And there's not like a sweet spot, like a perfect spot for it,
Yeah.
because it's going to change and evolve throughout your seasons and your schedule and your life. And I think that it's kind of having that State of the Union moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, not, I mean, we do this as a country, but like,
Yep.
I wonder what would be a recommended rhythm, and it would be different for every couple, I understand, but like of literally having a State of the Union conversation.
Yep.
Where are we with sex? Where are we with finances?
Yep.
Where are we in future goals? Like, you know, just kind of what we want to have happen in our home or with our kids, or, you know, house projects or travel plans. Like, I mean, just kind of all right, State of the Union.
Yeah.
And almost like depersonalizing it to the extent to be able to just receive it and hear it and see it as it is, and then step back and say, okay, so where do we want to take it?
Yep.
But I would think, I don't know, I would think that needs to happen at least annually, at least, if not every 3 to 6 months minimum in my mind.
Yeah.
But it doesn't need to be every date night. Can we say that too? Like this can't be a conversation we have, you know, every time we get together, or we're, you know.
Yep. Yeah, I always get the how specific with like the practical or logistical is always tough for me, because it can create, it can be both helpful as like, okay, give me some kind of starting point, like just tell me what to, you know, and then it can create a weird comparison or you know, a pride if I'm speaking about it more frequently than that, or a guilt if I'm not meeting that. And so there is definitely like a, you know, person to person, couple to couple rhythm. I mean, I don't know. Like Em and I don't know if I should ask her. I'll maybe ask her after Josh and cut it if it's not. But we do, like we call them our weekly meetings, State of the Unions is, you know, I've heard them called too. And there's a certain amount of practical things that we hit on. Like the upfront is a repeating. The second half is like, what was it like on the other side of me this week, and kind of leads to wherever that kind of goes. But the upfront is like, you know, our calendar, our schedule is like always on there. What's coming up like this week? Finances are always on there. And we have a sex touch point, and it's a lot of times that it might be like a 15-second touch point. It doesn't mean it's like a in-depth, we really like dove into it this week, but it's like part of the regular for us. And that's where I struggle to say like, man, if I said, like weekly is what you like would need to do, that would be like, oh my gosh, you know. And so I think the way you're talking about with the annual, it's like a different type of conversation. So
well, and I think, but the question is to start you having it.
Right.
So for us, it's a road trip conversation. Every road trip we take, like, and it's like we're going to be going to Dallas in a couple of weeks, and we'll spend that 2.5, 3-ish hours. Just kind of unpacking and checking in. And just kind of, where's he with work? Where am I with work? Where are we with the future? Where are we with Texas? We have that conversation often. You know, like, what are we thinking? Where are we?
You guys
and
love Texas, and we'll be here forever. But it's just, if you guys ever need help in that
I
convo,
mean,
I'll let you know.
That was a short discussion. You know, so we, you know, I do think like, but the thing is just to start. Because I think if you are someone who has that conversation regularly, which is great, whatever your annual, weekly, road trip, whatever your kind of rhythm is, I think though I'd be curious. I don't know if there's stats out there, but like I think that's actually the minority. I think most of us end up in situations, and I would say almost the first half of my marriage was we were just like trying to figure life out, and life was kind of dragging us along, especially when we had littles. And it was like we felt for certain moments like we were barely like keeping our head above water, much less being intentional enough to have those conversations. But I do think, I wish we had been more intentional, because I think it would have made that kind of like treading water in that season of life a little easier. You know, just because we would have you know, and I think for me that biblical reference is always this kind of like a storehouse. God, throughout all these stories, like we hear this like thought of build up a storehouse, or we see this character who, like, you know, was like, I need to build a storehouse to resist a famine as it comes along. And I just think there's a life principle in that of like having conversations like these, build up a storehouse for, even if you're not in a weird season, even if like sex is great and it's exactly where you think it should be, and you also feel strongly convicted it's right in line with God's design, still go ahead and start having those conversations. Even if it's like a high five, we're great.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep. Yeah, the touch point, like with those kind of foundational areas, and it's, I mean, a couple of those feel like it's going to be a core human thing. You know, if you never talked about money, I would be like, man, I don't know what personality or wiring is such that you don't ever have to talk about, you know what I mean?
Or bank account where you never have to talk about.
Yeah, it's like, you know, so, you know, and those, it kind of provides guardrails in seasons where like it maybe doesn't need that much intentionality, but could get, you know, off the rails really quick in a season where it was threatened to be like, okay, this is the point where we would catch it, you know, talk about it. We compare those to like, you know, leadership teams at an organization. Like, you know, if your like leadership team just never met for the running of your organization, well, it's like, that is your home. That is your organization.
Yeah.
That's your, you know, little kingdom. That's your, and so when are you like touching base to get, you know, on the same page with a lot of those? And that's where I feel like, and I think sex in particular gets one that if you don't have a designated space to talk about it, can be awkward to just bring up. Like, you know, just driving in the car, like, you know, the way to dinner or something. And hey, I'm frustrated, you know, you're like, okay, well now I feel attacked, or that was out of nowhere. Or like, so to have a place that, you know, is like, okay, this is a safe space to bring it up. I don't have to argue about this exhausted, you know, late at a random weeknight, but there's like a space where we're going to connect on it, I think can be really helpful for a lot of couples. Again, I don't know if that has to be an everybody thing, but it's a practical kind of step. You know,
I do think part of the reason that when you were just saying like, hey, I'm not happy, or like kind of just coming at it with this, like there's something just deeply personal about this topic that just makes it a little tricky for sure. What would you say to someone who is like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of how to phrase the question of like, because I think this is actually almost everyone for at least a moment of thinking that they're the only ones dealing with their particular sexual struggle or dynamic. Like no one else is doing, I'm not like everyone else. Everyone else is doing this. Every couple is doing this. Every individual, every dating relationship looks like this. Like what would you say to someone who's like, I have this unique dynamic that makes this a different topic for me?
Yeah. Google.
Oh, stop.
Just be careful with it.
Not Google image search, just a plain old all search. Yeah. That's a really interesting, because my default is just like, you're not. I'm like, can I just tell you you're not? That can be used for real. Just make that, you're not.
Yeah.
Done.
Well, I think, you know, this is an interesting topic because it is so intimate that like, you know, would I even recommend like, oh, there's got to be a friend or whatever? I think this may not be a couples thing because of the intimacy that can be created. But if you're a guy and you have a guy, if you're a girl, you have a girl that you can speak to. I referenced a counselor. I think what I like about a counselor is like their job to a degree is providing perspective. Like they are helping guide you to how normal this is. They are like all the questions. And I'm the only one. I have got 30 years of experience to tell you or not. Like, you know, it's like, so sometimes that can be really helpful. And sometimes it can be one voice. Like it can be just one person to sit down that says, I get you, I get that, I understand. That can really like take a lot of the weight of that out. So I don't know how you get there without like connection. You know, I don't know how you get there without somebody else to provide that space, because that's where we go so many topics. You know, it could be anything that where we wish, you know, we kind of feel like maybe there's this standard, this area that could be better or whatever, and I'm the only one that struggles with that. Like we can isolate in almost any pattern of thinking. And then to your point, I mean, this topic in particular seems to cut so much more to identity.
Well, and I think you did a good job on Sunday saying like this really we're starting a conversation. Yeah. Because this really should be a dialogue, not a monologue.
Right.
Like we can start here.
Yeah.
But I think that if you find yourself being like, I'm the only one dealing with this, or I'm feeling a lot of shame, or there's this one thing over here that I did or I am doing or I feel addicted to.
Yeah.
We don't talk about sexual addiction a ton either. Like starting by having a conversation with a trusted person, just even opening up the door to say, hey, I've got something going on in my life with pornography or with a sexual addiction or with just a question.
Yep.
You know, because we're also embarrassed of our questions.
Yeah.
I can remember being like married, like probably 2 or 3 years. I still had questions about stuff because we got married when we were like babies. Like, so I think I was like 22 and I was like, I didn't know what that meant. You know, some of like and so I think just starting by opening up that door. I told someone that, so we did ministry for so long, and I just feel like every year at some point was the sex conversation in some capacity. Student ministry, we had Sex Month every February, and the students could ask questions, right? When I shifted over into adult ministry, we would cover this topic in some capacity from the stage. And so we would always sit at the bottom of the stage after services, and people would come up for prayer, just, you know, conversation, or, hey, want to follow up with that one comment. And in all the years, people would always bring their, like, hey, this is what's happening in my relationship in terms of sex. And they really always genuinely thought, that you're not going to know how to handle this. You're going to be blown away. You know, this is what we've gotten ourselves into. This is what we're into doing. This is what we're into watching. This is what, how we're handling, we're treating each other. And only once out of all those times was I ever like, oh, that is new. Like every other situation in my mind, I may not have said it, and I didn't like, let me introduce you to someone. I didn't do that. But I was like, no, you're not. Yes, this is familiar to some extent, right? Like, but this one person came to me. It was a very new situation for me to hear about, and I literally went home, and a couple of days later, there was a documentary on it. I was like, oh, people are okay. Yeah. Also not alone.
Right.
You know, I mean, still, like, just because you're not alone doesn't mean there isn't something that we need to have a conversation around, and that there aren't still parameters, right? But it is something to say, like, I think there's very little we experience that we can't find a touch point in some human relationship. We're just wired that way. We're knit together to be knit together to one another too.
Yep. 100%. I think that's actually a really good point, that it's like the normalizing is a starting point. There's something about not feeling alone that feels hopeful.
Yes.
Somebody else who's, you know, navigated this, has maybe overcome this, has, you know, made progress. And it doesn't mean that because it's normal, it's where you should stay.
It's not a permission slip.
Right. Yeah. Oh, it is normal to be in a sexless marriage. Okay. We can stay there. Like, oh no, that's not actually what we're communicating either. We just want you to know, like, you are not uniquely broken, weird, messed up, dark, dirty, like
beyond.
Yes. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So that the normalizing is interesting. But it's even, I mean, even some of the not nuanced situations that are like so common that people tend to think there's something, you know, like the number of, just because we're in church world, like people that feel like at some point in a convo like this, they have to like confess, well, we didn't wait till marriage. And it's like, they throw it in there. And it's like, I think 95 to 97% don't is what I've seen, assuming the like 3 to 5% are telling the truth. Like, it's like, you know, it's like that high. So when you like say it, like, you're not going
to fall out of your chair.
Yeah, exactly.
What?
Yeah. I think, you know, man, I haven't looked more recently in student ministry. I was like a lot more with like statistics, but pornography, I think on the low end, it was like, I saw studies that were like 30% of women, 60% of men, all the way up to like 50% of women, 85, 90% of men. Like, it's probably that high. And again, you're banking on people telling the truth that are in the no category.
Yes.
Like, you know, so it's like these overwhelming like amount of statistics, you know, if you think about a room that's an auditorium our size, you know, and what that means, okay, we could just take this half the auditorium and like, you know, and we just like, again, assume though, like I'm the only one. I'm the only one still at my age. Like I should have been, you know, or
that's I think that's another thought we have for sure.
100%. So,
and I think a lot of those things, I'm just, again, haven't done any research on this, but just even I would imagine that there's a lot that's changed culturally in terms of sex and sexuality and all the stuff that just even with the digital era and even then COVID, even in the isolation of COVID. And so like you take this chunk of even just the last 4 years, let's just take that window.
Right.
I wonder like even just what that has done to how we understand and how we interact with intimacy or images and what we've also probably convinced ourselves is okay, like is good for us or isn't that bad. You know, I know when it comes to anything in life, this is not just about sex, but like we typically want to find the line. We don't want to cross it, but man, we want to get right up to it. You know, it's like, how far can I go with anything without really knowing I went too far, but also doing what I want to do. Right. And so instead of fleeing from it, like when you're talk about some of those things like you talked about Sunday, it's like, no, we like that line. And then we rationalize it. We go, well, this is what I needed in the moment. And I think in couples having conversations around it is, one part of the couple will often compromise what they truly want and are thinking out of fear, right? Especially in the dating stage, right? I don't want to lose you. It shifts when we are in holy wedlock. When we get locked together, it's like, it's gonna be a little harder to get rid of me a little bit, So but in dating, I think that we compromise what we truly hope for and want and believe. You said some of those statements, like the ways that we rationalize doing whatever we really want to do, kind of like, got to try it before I buy it. It's like, I had a friend once say, that's cool with like a car, but like you wouldn't do that with a toothbrush.
Right. Right.
It's like, and that's
interesting.
Probably a little more accurate of a analogy than than a vehicle. Right.
Yes.
So, but we just want that.
Yeah. Well, we have students in Inside Out who like, and I want to be careful the tone isn't like judgmental, because this is like a lot more normal. We have parents who like encourage it. We have parents who like, hey, in a safe environment, I want you to have sex. Like, I want you to experience it. Like, I want you to know, like, are you compatible? There's parents who like, what they connect, I would say it's a false connection, but like in their own struggle, they're like, I didn't find out like what I liked first, and now because I'm struggling, my solution is you need to find out that first. Are you sexually compatible first? Which I wish I could sit down and tell people like you'll figure it out.
And you actually don't. You still don't know once you think you figured it out.
Yeah.
Things I love like in our dynamic. So I was someone who had sex in high school, kind of probably just a really typical story in so many ways. And Sal was not. So our wedding night was Sal's first time.
Yeah.
And so figuring things out in so many ways. And it's been hilarious and great. Like it's been, but I don't feel like, and I would have to ask him, you may have to edit this out too, Josh. Like, I don't feel like he would, say I still had to figure it out. Right. Like, and I still had to figure it out, even though I'd had this experience in the past.
Yep.
And we're still figuring out, like, I'm trying, it's like a fine line between like, that's real, and wow, it's like TMI. But like in my age now, like I'm like, like my back might get thrown out or my hip gets stuck. I know it's weird, but it's sorry, you can edit that
and out. There's the line, and there it goes.
That's why Josh is here.
I'm just saying like that. It's not going to be a thing. It's not even an evolution, because when I hear evolution, I think of like a progression that it is different in different seasons, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally and capacity and time and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
It's just going to be different. I mean, I've got some friends that I'm really close with, some women that are further down their journey than I am, and they've got these like menopause stories. I'm like, but we're talking about it.
Yeah.
Like, and so like, I feel like when I hit that season, the things that I experience, I'll be like, I remember so-and-so saying, So Josh, you'll remember one day, I remember when Jen said like her hip gets stuck, her leg gets a cramp. Like, I mean, I'm just old. Things are not nearly as like, I'm doing anything with my hands.
Like as much as I'm sure there are all kinds of people being like, amen, thank you for saying that, Jen. It's also like, well, I think it's where like intimacy is the better long-term goal. Like you're not 20 forever,
Yes.
And so there's something intimate about being with this person you've been for 20 years and now your back's and he's got to be there for it, Well, like we're growing old together, like we're in this together, So.
And I think, I had one couple once I was working with, and they just have very different perspectives on intimacy and sex and frequency. And, and they were just, this one part of the union was like, if it's not this often, then we are broken and this can't work. And I'm like, but if she gets paralyzed, like, I mean, like, look, I'm not wishing anything on anybody, but like, I don't think that's really what you mean.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's fine to want sex frequently. That is great. Good for you. Go for it. But like, I think when you strip it away, it is that intimacy. Like, because you're really not, I don't think you're saying that if something happens to my spouse and that is no longer something they are able to perform, I will then be done with them. Right. Because we don't see that as the only part of them. And that goes back to that, like, this isn't everything, but it's so not nothing.
Yeah. Yep.
So
it is that weird balance. It's like, I think, one of the things I probably wish I had time to explore, but I felt like it would have maybe just minimized it in the context, and I was already long. But it's like, it is a piece of the intimacy pie. Like, there is, more to it. And it's weird how I don't think a pie is the right way to think about it, because it's like, yes, there's an emotional intimacy and relational intimacy and spiritual intimacy, and so, but they are all intertwined and connected. Yeah. So I don't know what the right analogy is, more like a mist. It's all come together. You can't separate it all out necessarily. But in that, it is also not all of it. Like,
yes.
You know what I mean?
That's right.
And so it's that kind of, foundational, but lots of things connected to it. There's a weird kind of what comes first, chicken or the egg type conversation to it.
Yeah.
Is it like we were emotionally intimate leading up to it, that's what led to it? Or is it what started it and launched us into some more emotional intimacy? Even how men and women experience that typically is actually like different, the lead up versus afterwards. So it's all, it's there's a connectedness to it, but to your point, it is not the end all be all. It's not.
What is that? There's a verse that's, it's such, I'm totally going to butcher this. Such and such, but mastered by nothing. I'm like,
I've got Google here for
okay,
you.
Good.
So.
Do you know what I'm talking about? It's like similar to what you said when you use the passage about like everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial, and like kind of reframing how we actually, because we use that, but it's something I'll be.
Yeah,
food
1
for
Corinthians
the stomach
6:12 is what
food.
I use this week. I just think, so mastered by anything.
Is it just a different translation of that?
Yep.
Oh,
yep.
Okay. Look at us using the same verse.
Yep.
Different translations. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I do think that, like, I think, none of it's supposed to, like, food, finances, communicate, like, all these things, none of it should master us. They're tools for us, right?
Oh, no, I
like,
said mastered. I just looked at my slides.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, super prepared here.
Yeah.
What's that verse? Oh, you mentioned, did I say it on Sunday?
Oh, yeah. You said one of my favorite verses, and I actually decided I'm going to use it next Sunday, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah, I was already going to use an Isaiah passage, and then you used one of my favorite verses. And so I'm going to actually be like, quoting Isaiah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway,
All
just
right.
a sneak peek for everybody who's like, ooh, I can't wait what Isaiah said next week.
Yeah, for the conclusion this week.
Okay, well, how are we going to wrap this up? You said so many amazing things Sunday. We are actually, Matt and I were talking about it inside out. We just need to replay that. Like, it just was so good for students, and I've heard the students that are in that little front row section have already just chatted about it and talked about it, and just already pulling some of that into their own conversations.
Yeah.
And so I think what will be interesting as generations kind of move forward is you had made a comment about someone had told you maybe church should just take a break from chatting about this to some extent.
Yeah.
Why don't you kind of I think that's a cool comment.
Yeah. No, I have one of my friends that is I just have a lot of respect for him. He's led a lot of high capacities and is really influential. Wrote a book recently. I mean, he's a great thinker, and he made a comment that, he's like, sometimes I feel like the church or like pastors should take a 10-year break from talking about this topic or something like we would have to so acknowledge that we've gotten it wrong for so long, be it shame or, purity culture or all this kind of stuff, that there's almost needs to be like this pause, this recalibrate, this repent, this learn, before we like actually go and speak with an authority on it. And he wasn't actually saying that we should never have the convo or, scripture's not clear enough, but he was just saying like, that's the weight to it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
We have to acknowledge that. And we were talking earlier about like the purity movement, which you don't really remember.
Right.
But when I was doing student ministry, it was a thing.
Yep.
And it really brought, it was kind of kicked off by the book I Kissed Dating Goodbye, which was not a bad book at all. But then we just, as we do in culture, not just church culture, but like culture, we just run.
Yeah.
And it becomes a thing. But then, women as they've gotten older really struggled with a lot of shame out of choices that they made, and really had attached how God views them to those mistakes. So their mistakes had become their identity.
Yep.
And so, I think it's an important conversation, but one that you handled really well, and I'm thankful that the church would even step into those conversations. And next week we'll have a little bit of that taste too, like, hey, there's some things that maybe we've taught a little, we haven't really fully framed well.
Yep.
Yep. So it's been good conversations, all of them. I loved it. Was really cool when Buck was gone and I had to talk about wives submit to your husband. I think next year he needs to give on that same verse, but just that verse. He's not allowed to go past that verse. He can't talk about the husband's, commands or, mutual stuff or like, out of reverence for one another. He just has to focus there. Unpack that, Buck.
Good. That would be good. I like it.
Okay.
Yeah. I when you're like what to land, I feel like there's a couple things that have just even come up in convo that feel like you're not alone is a starting point, I think, in whatever, whether it is a struggle, you feel like you're failing, a desire, a temptation, a fear, addiction, whatever your situation is that feels unique and you've never talked to a friend about before, like you're not alone in it. I feel like what we acknowledge with that doesn't mean that's where you necessarily have to stay just because you're not alone in it. It means that like somebody somewhere has navigated before, which should provide like hope, not comparison or shame or anything in that kind of category. And then I think, it was that single question, but I think that there's something about like what story do you want to tell in this area? It does feel like you do have to look forward a little bit to decide like I'd want to do anything different today. And I think especially in this area, because there is an immediate gratification. There is like a, what's the big deal? There are like ways to satisfy it now temporarily that I'd have to think a little bit forward and have some kind of a bigger goal to say like, this is what I'm fighting for in this area. To, I think, motivate me to take any like steps today, you know?
Yeah.
And so the idea of if I don't like my story up to this moment, the idea I'm not going to write a good conclusion either. Like you would have to pause and say, that doesn't make any sense. Like, if you're listening to this, you're alive. And so your story's not over, like your conclusion isn't done. So go write a heck of an ending versus like, just throw in the towel. I didn't like chapter 1 or whatever it is. So I don't know. I think that's where I feel like I'd kind of land.
That sets me up perfect for next week, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah. No, but I think like,
you're
not alone. You're, start the conversation. Even if you're in a single phase, like get a mentor.
Yeah.
Start your conversation even. Like you think that, if you're not dating, if you're like totally not dating anybody, go ahead and start the conversation though, with someone that you trust. And then knowing that there is always a better story that can be written. I mean, every day is part 2, right? Like, there's just never, I remember in all these Bible stories, I would just I'd have so many questions for God about like, well, what happens if the prodigal son goes off and squanders again? Or what happens if the adulterous woman goes back? I mean, like, and all these things, I remember God was just like, I'm writing that story. You don't get part 2 of other people's stories. You get part 2 of yours, so let's write that together. And I think that there's literally, you're only one turn away from a better direction. Like just take one step in a better direction.
There we go.
Amen.
Okay,
we're done. Do we need to conclude any other like how to
Josh, you got any
wrap
more
this thing
songs for
up?
us?
Yep. Oh, you're gonna another outro.
No, I think that was great.
Okay.
What a smooth land.
Josh
What a smooth landing of the
Ken's
podcast.
still working on this.
We're so
Honestly, I'm gonna do a compilation.
and we're done.
of-
I don't think I realized how bad I am at that until you pointed that out. I'm like, seems like you just kind of, and now we're gonna pray.
I was crying. Let's pray. Oh, okay, we're done.
I bet my kids would be like, that's how she does everything. Like that's like, and we had a good time, had a good vacation, done.
Bye, guys.